Hey all, what's up? It's Amanda and I'm back with another video. So today's video, I am going to be filming my July wrap-up. I have a ton of books to talk to you about, so let's just get right on into the video. So the first part of this video, we are going to be going over all of my stats. I always get my stats from the Storygraph. So if you don't follow me on the Storygraph, what are you doing? If you don't have the Storygraph, what are you doing? It's the greatest app for reading tracking because it gives you stats, and I love stats. So anyways, I read a total of 24 books this month. That is because I read a graphic novel series and I counted each chapter as a book, even though each chapter was like 25 pages. So ignore that. Ignore that. Whatever. I didn't know at the time because I read them digitally, but that's just what happened. I read a total of 4,753 pages, and as we all know, my audiobook reading, it says 0 pages, but as we know, I listen to all of my books while physically reading them, and I count them as physically read instead of audiobooks, so this is inaccurate. We have a new stat on the Storygraph. Average time to finish your book. It took me 4 days on average to finish my books. I think that's because one of the books that I finished in the month of July, I finished like a month after I started it, so that probably extended the average, a little bit. But the rest of these books I finished within like 2 days. I have been on a reading kick lately, so yeah. My top moods were lighthearted, adventurous, funny, and dark. Those are the biggest 4 slices of the pie, you know what I mean? For pacing, 4% of the books were slow-paced. That equals to 1 book. 46% of the books that I read were medium-paced. That equals 11 books. And then 50% of the books were fast-paced, which equals 12 books. For page number, I have a majority of my books were less than 300 pages. It says 71% of the books I read were less than 300 pages, which equals to 17 books that I read. And then there were 7 books that I read that were 300 to 499 pages long, which equals 29% of the books that I read. For fiction versus nonfiction, I actually read 1 nonfiction this month, so go me. That equals 8% of the books that I read. And then the other 92%, or the other 23 books that I read, were fiction. I got cut off on my camera. But anyways, for genres, my most read genres were fantasy, LGBTQIA+, and comics. And that is because of the graphic novel series that I read. They're technically comics that I read online. I read them digitally, so that accounts for a lot of the books that I read. For tags, 14 of the books that I read were tagged as library books. 9 of the books that I tagged were tagged as owned, and 1 book was tagged as an ARC. For format, 38% of the books that I read were digital. That equals 9 books. So like I said, the graphic novel series that I read it all digitally, so that's that. And then the rest of the books that I read, or the 63% of the other books that I read, were print. For star ratings, I gave 1 2-star, 1 3-star, 3 3.5 stars, 1 3.75, 1 4-star, 5 4.25 stars, and 4 5 stars. So overall, my average rating was a 4.03. I also only rated 16 of the books that I read because the graphic novel series that I read, it was fun, I enjoyed it, but it was like a children's graphic novel, and I was like, I don't know if I should rate this, so I didn't. And yeah, those are all of my statistics for the month of July. Let's get right on into the books. So the first book that I read in the month of July, the first book that I finished was Youth Juice by E.K. Sathue. I hope that's how you pronounce their name. I'm not 100% sure on how to pronounce their name. I'll have the cover up here. Honestly, I forget what this book was about. It was that forgettable, but It was basically about a 29-year-old copywriter realizes that beauty is possible at a terrible cost. That's what the little blurb says at the top of the synopsis. But basically, our main character, Sophia, gets involved in this like beauty lifestyle brand called Hebe, and she kind of falls deep into the culture behind like beauty and staying young looking and all this stuff. And she has like some scarring on her hands, and this brand, like, she works for this brand, but she gets this like special cream that she's testing out, or that the brand is testing out, and they're giving it to their employees like, hey, try this out. And she uses it on her hands and it gets rid of like the scarring on her hands. So she's like, oh my gosh, this is magical stuff. But then she becomes obsessed with beauty and obsessed with clear skin and obsessed with youth. And so there's this whole plot with like her boss that it was just like meh. I gave this 3.5 stars when I initially rated it, but I think I'm gonna lower it to a 3 because it was just forgettable. Like I never thought about this book after I finished it. It was just meh. Not anything outstanding. The next book that I read was You Look Better as a Ghost by Joanna Wallace. This book is very interesting. We follow our main character Claire, who essentially is like a serial killer. She has killed multiple men throughout her life, and we get flashbacks from her childhood to the present. And the present actually starts out with her father's funeral, and she was very close with her father, and her mother is no longer with us, so it was just her and her father. And her father had a very big influence on her life, and so she kind of is reeling from his death. And the night after, or the same night of her father's funeral, it's so stupid, but she's an artist as well. And so she submitted her artwork to this exhibit to see if it would be shown in this exhibit, and she doesn't get chosen. She actually gets an email from the guy named Lucas, who was like in charge of this whole thing, saying like, hey, you are the winner, you are the submission that we are choosing. And then he follows it up with an email saying, sorry, I clicked on the wrong name for the email. You did not win, actually. And so she decides to just go out and kill him. So that starts this long-winded plot of like shenanigans, and it was such a fun time. I really enjoyed this one. This one I gave a 4.25 stars. I really enjoyed this one and I highly recommend. It's not like a murder mystery because you know that the main character is the murderer, but it is like a mystery thriller because there is somebody that decides to start blackmailing our main character because they're like, I know what you did, I know you killed this guy. And so she starts panicking, thinking that her secret is going to be told to everyone. And it's just like a fun, silly ride. I really love this one. The next book that I finished in the month is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. This book is about our main character, Jade, and she is in her senior year of high school. She's about to graduate. This takes place in the summer, like June of her senior year. So she graduates and then the summer starts. But so before she graduates, there's this new girl in town that Jade is convinced is the epitome of a final girl. And so she gets it in her head that there is a slasher that is about to happen in her hometown, and she is on a mission to try and solve the mystery of who the slasher is going to be and when it's going to happen, and she tries to warn everybody. But of course, Jade knows herself that the typical tropes of a slasher are that somebody discovers the plot and tries to tell the cops that the slasher is happening, and the cops don't believe her. So of course the same thing happens to Jade. The cops don't believe her. They think she's having like a mental health crisis. It's very interesting. It talks a lot about trauma, so like trigger warning for that, as well as just, it's very gory. So there's a ton of trigger warnings. Check the content warnings before you read this one, but I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really well done, and I can't wait to continue on with the series. I give this 4.25 stars. Next, I read When in French, Love in a Second Language by Lauren Collins. This was my TBR jar pick, so I picked this from my little ghosty TBR jar. And this is basically a memoir by Lauren Collins. She is a writer for like a magazine or something like that, and she writes this book telling the love story between her and her husband. Her husband, she actually meets while she's in England, I believe, and he's like a Frenchman. And they eventually move to Switzerland, where one of the country's like languages is French. So it's her journey of like learning French and learning to love her husband in English when it's his second language. And it was interesting, but at the same time I didn't really care, so I gave this 2 stars. I'm so sorry, Lauren Collins, but I just did not care. I did not care at all. All the like cutesy, I was expecting it to be like a love story, but it really wasn't. It was more so about like the nuances of language, and I just didn't care about that. I do want to say that I'm not sure if my camera got all of that, but My Heart is a Chainsaw as well as Little Rot are featured in my Summerween vlog. So if you want more in-depth thoughts, more fresh thoughts, go to that vlog and watch it. But the next book I read in the month was Little Rot by Akwege Emezi. This book is hard to pitch, but it's a thriller kind of, okay? Essentially, we are following multiple main characters. We are initially following Ima and Kalu. They are this couple that at the beginning of the book are breaking up, and Kalu is actually taking Ima to the airport so she can leave. And essentially there's this whole plot of like Kalu, he's reeling from the breakup because he didn't want to break up with her. He goes to like this sex party, and something happens at the sex party with him where he basically gets a target on his back, and somebody puts a hit out for him and starts this whole chain of events where Ima is involved, and one of her friends is involved, and one of Kalu's friends is involved, and it's this huge crazy scheme, and I really enjoyed it. I gave this a 4.25. It's not my favorite Akwege Emezi, but it is a very well-written one, and I really enjoyed it. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time, and I wanted to just know what was happening. Like, I just could not put it down. You know what I mean? So I really highly recommend this one, but also trigger warning for this one as well. It gets very dark. So trigger warning for that. The next book that I finished was also in my Summerween vlog, but this is Fangs by Sarah Anderson. This is just a cute little cozy but also spooky book about a vampire and a werewolf that end up falling in love. And that's all you really need to know about this book. It's really cute. I have the, what is this, cloth bound hardcover edition of it. It has sprayed edges. These are black sprayed edges. I don't know if you can tell. Yeah. And yeah, I just had a really fun time with this. The next book that I finished was a carryover from June. This is Me, My Dad, and the End of the Rainbow by Benjamin Dean. This is a middle grade book that I had been reading since June. And it's basically about our main character, Archie. He's in middle school, and he finds out a secret about his parents. His parents are separated, and he finds out why they're separated, and it kind of starts this chain of events of him going on a scheme, on a mission to try and fix things. And it's really cute. I really love the themes of like belonging and accepting yourself for what you are and familial dynamics. It was great. I love this one. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read Death Valley by Melissa Broder. This one I was highly anticipating, and unfortunately it didn't deliver. This follows our main character who basically is reeling from like the expected loss of her father. Her father is like in the ICU and he is in her mind on death's doorstep. And so she basically gets lost in the desert thinking that her dad is dead. And it is like a fever dream of like what the heck is happening. And it was good. I did enjoy the writing. I love Melissa Broder's writing style, but it just wasn't the same, or it wasn't as good as Milkfed was for me. I ultimately gave this 3.5 stars. It was a fun time. It was a fever dream, like I said, but it just didn't give me that like that 5-star feeling. You know what I mean? Next is another library book that I do not have with me. This is Big Swiss by Jen Began. We follow our main character who is a transcriber for this sex therapist, and basically she's transcribing different therapy sessions, and she comes across this one client who she calls Big Swiss because they are Swiss and they are perceived to be very large, like very tall. And basically all you need to know is that our main character becomes obsessed with Big Swiss and starts a relationship with her, which is totally against like all the confidentiality laws like ever. It's unethical, and it's just this very random plot. I enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5 stars ultimately because I didn't connect to the characters as much as I wanted to. There was a ton of different things happening and it was very chaotic, which I very much enjoyed. That's what I enjoyed about this book. But I just didn't feel as connected to the characters as I wanted to. And at times I was just like, okay, I don't care. Like, let's keep going. Trigger warning for this one as well. There is like a dog that gets injured. The dog is fine, but like I thought the dog was going to die. So I was sobbing. And I did not like that. So yeah, that is Big Swiss. The next book that I finished was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This is my first Ali Hazelwood and I love this one. I gave this 4.25 stars. We are following Misery and Lo. Misery is a vampire and Lo is a werewolf. So we're in this like paranormal romance. And essentially Misery and Lo have to get into this arranged marriage in order to form an alliance between the werewolves and the vampires. But all the while, Misery is trying to find her human friend, Sabrina. Or is it Selena? I don't know. But there is this whole mystery of like, where is Misery's friend? She discovers some things, like a secret between Lo and her friend, and it just gets very interesting. I liked the plot. I didn't see who the big bad was, and yeah, I enjoyed the main characters' like connection. I really loved their relationship and I had a good time with this one. All right, y'all, brief pause. If the camera angle has changed, oh well. But the next, oh, do you hear that thunder too? Interesting. But the next books that I read, I'm just gonna lump them all together because they're part of a series. I read the first 8 chapters of Lumberjanes, which equals the first 2 volumes. But I didn't know that at the time of like locking them in my Goodreads and Storygraph, so whatever. These I did not rate because they're just fun graphic novels. They're about a group of friends who go to the Lumberjane camp over the summer and they get into hijinks and shenanigans, and it was a really fun time. I really enjoyed this and I want to continue on with the series. And at first I was like, where am I in the series? But now that I know I read the first 2 volumes, I can move on and it's all good now. With the Lumberjanes, I also did not technically read them in July only. I started them in June and they kind of rolled over to July, but I didn't log them in June. So I just logged them all in July. Oh well. Same thing for Sheets. I believe I started Sheets in June if not finished it in June, but I just never logged it. But Sheets is a graphic novel by Brenda Thumler, and it is basically about this girl who is dealing with the loss of her mother, and the family owns a laundromat, or a dry cleaners is the better term for it. They own a dry cleaners, and essentially she finds a ghost. He takes the form of a sheet of like a blanket. Yeah, so they become close friends and they kind of deal with death together. And it is a cute time. I rated this 5 stars. I really enjoyed all the themes of like loss and finding joy after loss, acceptance of like the circumstances you're in, stuff like that. So it was very interesting. Also asking for help when you need it. It was very good. So that's that one. Next, I read Coraline, the graphic novel by Neil Gaiman. I vlogged this one in my weekend vlog, so if you didn't see that vlog, go check it out. I'll have it linked up here. This one, I just thought it was okay. I've watched the movie Coraline a ton of times, and it's like my favorite movie. But the graphic novel, I was expecting a little different something from it, but it was just okay. I gave it 3 stars. The Sprite and the Gardener is the next book that I read. This is by Joe Witt and Ree Abrigo. This book was another graphic novel, like I said, and it was just a cute little time. I don't know, it was just like a cozy vibes, you know? So this one was about our main character, Wisteria, who is a sprite, and she moves to this like new neighborhood with other sprites, and she decides to help this gardener, like a human gardener, with their garden, because that's what sprites used to do. They used to help grow the plants, but now that humans are involved, it's like they don't need sprites. But Wisteria helps this human, the human's name is Elena, to cultivate this garden, and it just turns into this like fun, cute time about like reaching out for help when you need it, doing nice things for others, getting your friends involved, stuff like that. So it was really cute. I gave this one 5 stars just because a cute graphic novel with cozy vibes, you're gonna get 5 stars from me. Like that's just it. The next book that I read, I don't have it with me. I read it on my Kindle, and I don't have my Kindle with me right now. But I read Men Have Called Her Crazy by Anna Marie Tendler. This was a memoir about Anna Marie Tendler's life in, I believe it was circa 2021. She decided to go to a mental hospital to get like a diagnosis on like what is wrong with her. And along the way, we follow her as she makes friends, as she gets a better grasp on her mental health, as she realizes that she needs more help than she thinks she does, and that's okay. And then we also follow her life when she was growing up and her relationship with men, and it was just a very powerful memoir. I really enjoyed it. It's not like the right word, I guess, but I thought it was very powerful and thought-provoking, and I really connected with Anna Marie Tendler's writing. I feel like it was just, the narrative was very linear in the sense of like it flowed very well. Like even though we were jumping back and forth between the past and the present, I just think it made a lot of sense, and her storytelling felt like she was confiding in a friend, and I really enjoyed that part about it. So ultimately I gave this 5 stars. I really enjoyed this book. The second to last book that I read, oh, there's a car going by. Oh my goodness, rude. The second to last book that I read in the month of July was Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin. This is a horror novel about, our main characters are Beth and Fran. They are trans women living in a world where basically there's this illness that only affects men or people with testosterone. It's a very interesting plot, okay? So basically there is this group called the TERFs. They are trans exclusionary radical feminists, and they are claiming that women are like the gods of the land or whatever, and that women are holier than thou and all this stuff, and that men are the scum of the earth, and same with like trans women. and yada yada. So they are trying to take over, and Beth and Fran get kind of wrapped up in this plot that they're in, that the TERFs are like involved with. And it's very interesting. There's like a lot going on in the plot. I enjoyed this one. Ultimately, I gave it 3.75 stars. It wasn't my favorite horror. It was definitely very gory, I'll give you that. And there was a lot of different dynamics going on throughout the book. But again, I just didn't really connect with the characters as much. Like, one of the characters in the book that we're introduced to dies, and I just kind of like was like, okay. Like, I wasn't connected. So I do recognize how interesting the different themes are in this book. So, and how necessary some of the themes are in this book in this day and age. Not to sound like an old lady, but in this day and age. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's why I gave it 3.75 stars. It was also my TBR jar pick for July. The other book that I mentioned that was my TBR pick was for June. And as you can see, I read it in July, so whatever. We're gonna ignore that. The last book that I read in July was The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. This book is a collection of the Throne of Glass novellas, and it kind of sets up the story for the Throne of Glass series. I'm really glad I read it. It was really interesting. I gave this 4.25 stars. It was really good. I really enjoyed the plot between Selena and Sam and everything that was happening with, you know, the politics behind all of this. And I didn't see some of it coming. Like, some of it was just shocking. And basically, I am planning on continuing the series, hopefully in the month of August, but I didn't put it on my TBR because I'm on hold at the library, okay? And it says I'm number 60th in line. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's gonna take months for me to get it. Like, I'm so sad about it. Anyways, so these are all of the books, or most of the books that I read in the month of July. It looks like a lot. There's a lot more that I read in July that are not featured here. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, like, comment, and subscribe to my channel if you aren't already. And if you don't know what to say, comment the blade emoji, like the sword emoji, or a knife emoji, honestly, for the Assassin's Blade. I always have all of my social medias linked in the description down below. I have Instagram, Threads, TikTok, The Storygraph, and Goodreads. So follow me or friend me on those, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.